The rain came down in sheets, plastering Marcus Webb's worn flannel shirt to his back as he crouched beside the luxury SUV. The woman's voice cut through the downpour, sharp and impatient. "Are you going to finish changing that tire? Or is this part of a longer plan to rob me?" Marcus didn't look up. He'd heard worse. He gave the final lug nut a last turn with the wrench, the sound of it tightening a small victory against the storm. He set the tool down on the wet asphalt and rose slowly, the rain streaming off the hood of his old canvas jacket. He was taller than she'd assumed when he was on his knees, broader too, with a stillness that didn't belong to a nervous drifter. He was a single father who had spent the day chasing small engine repairs across the county, patching transmissions and swapping out alternators, stretching every dollar until it was threadbare. His son, Caleb, was at home with a neighbor, probably pretending not to be watching the clock, probably staring at it the same way he always did when Marcus promised to be back before dinner and the sky turned dark before he could make good on it. He'd stopped because a stranded driver on the side of a North Carolina highway was still a stranded driver, no matter how polished the car or how sharp the words. People liked to think kindness was a luxury. In his experience, it was usually the only thing people like him had to give. The woman stood by the rear passenger door, one heel sinking into the gravel of the shoulder. She wore a fitted coat over clothes too expensive for this stretch of rural blacktop, and everything about her suggested she was used to people opening doors before she reached them. Her face was composed, but her eyes kept cutting down the road and then back to him, measuring. That was when the first black SUV swung in behind her vehicle. Then another. Then a third. Doors opened almost in unison. Men in dark suits stepped out with the quick, controlled movements of people trained to assume the worst before anyone else noticed it. The woman's posture changed. Not relaxed, not relieved, recognized. So she wasn't just rich. She was protected. The nearest man stopped 3 feet from Marcus, his gaze dropping to the tire iron on the pavement before rising to his face. His expression held a particular kind of contempt reserved for working men found too close to money. "Step back from the vehicle. Now." Marcus raised his hands a little, more tired than intimidated. Tires changed. Jacks still under load. "If you move it too fast, you'll shift the balance." I said step back. He took 1 step, no more. The woman opened her mouth like she meant to explain, then shut it when a second guard reached her side. She wasn't scared of Marcus. She was scared of whatever had made this response necessary. That was when he looked back at the wheel he'd just finished. The blowout had bothered him from the start. Tires failed, but not like that. The tear along the sidewall hadn't looked random. The scoring near the inner edge was too neat. And the brake line behind the assembly had a faint shine where rain should have dulled everything evenly. Now, the convoy was here. Now men with earpieces and sidearms were treating a flat tire like an active threat. And now his stomach tightened with an old instinct he had spent years trying to bury under repair invoices and school pickup schedules. The man in front of him followed his gaze. "What are you looking at?" Marcus didn't answer right away. He crouched, ignoring the warning in the guard's face, and leaned toward the wheel well. The rain had cleared the dust enough for him to see it cleanly now. Not road damage. Not wear. Careful, deliberate tampering. When he stood again, the calm in him had changed shape. "You don't want her driving this car." The woman stared at him. The lead guard took 1 step closer. For the first time that night, every eye on the shoulder turned exactly where he was looking. The head of security, a man named David Cross, followed Marcus's gaze into the wheel well. For a moment, he said nothing, only squinting through the glare of hazard lights reflecting off the wet metal. "What exactly are you implying?" Marcus wiped his hands slowly on the rag hanging from his back pocket. "I'm not implying anything. I'm telling you the tire wasn't the real problem." Cross straightened. "We didn't ask for a diagnosis. You were asked to change a tire." "And I did," Marcus replied quietly. "But you might want to look closer before you send her back out." The security team exchanged brief glances. The convoy engines idled behind them, deep and steady. Dr. Andrea Lawson stepped forward from the shelter of the open SUV door. Her voice carried calm authority now, far different from the sharp tone she'd used earlier. What do you think you see? Cross turned toward her. Dr. Lawson, I suggest we handle this internally. Andrea didn't move her eyes from the mechanic. I asked him. Marcus crouched again beside the wheel. He pointed toward the thin black brake line. You see that shine right there? Cross leaned closer despite himself. That's rain, Cross said. Not quite, Marcus replied. Rain would coat the whole line. That spot's clean. Someone wiped it recently. Cross's jaw tightened. That doesn't mean sabotage. No, Marcus agreed calmly, but the scoring on the sidewall does. Andrea stepped closer, her coat darkening with rain. What scoring? Marcus traced the air just above the tire's shredded edge. Those cuts are too uniform. A blowout from road debris tears jagged. This one was weakened first. Cross folded his arms. You're telling us someone tampered with the tire? I'm telling you someone weakened it enough to fail at speed. But the brake line behind it, that's what would finish the job. Cross's expression hardened. And how exactly would a roadside mechanic know that? Marcus stood, looking out at the dark highway. When he spoke again, his voice carried a steady calm. Because I've seen it before. Cross took a step closer, where Marcus met his eyes. Vehicles designed to look safe until they hit 70 miles an hour. Andrea's gaze sharpened. Cross looked at the mechanic again, then crouched to examine the brake line more closely. The rain had washed the area clean enough that the mark Marcus had pointed out was impossible to ignore. A thin cut barely visible beneath the protective coating. Cross's breath slowed. That's, he began. Not road damage, Marcus finished quietly. Andrea straightened. Could it fail immediately? Marcus shook his head.
No.
That's the point. Cross looked up at him. What do you mean? Marcus glanced toward the convoy of black SUVs. Whoever did it didn't want the car to fail here. They wanted it to fail later. Andrea's voice dropped. At speed. Marcus nodded. Cross rose quickly, turning to his team. No one moves that vehicle. Andrea crossed her arms, studying the quiet mechanic. You noticed this while fixing the tire? Part of it. And you didn't say anything earlier. Marcus shrugged faintly. You were in a hurry, and I wasn't sure yet. Cross faced him again. You're telling me you spotted a professional sabotage job in 5 minutes on the side of a highway? Marcus glanced back at the wheel. Closer to 3. Andrea tilted her head. What's your name? Marcus. Marcus Webb. Cross studied him more carefully now. Grease-stained boots, an old jacket, calloused hands. Nothing about the man fit the calm certainty he'd just shown. If this is sabotage, Cross said slowly, then whoever did it expected her to drive away. Exactly. Andrea looked at the damaged wheel. And if we had, Marcus met her gaze. You probably wouldn't make it to the next exit. Cross turned to one of his men. Full sweep of the vehicle. Andrea remained where she was, watching Marcus in the rain. You stopped because you wanted to help. Yeah. And now you're telling me someone tried to kill me. Marcus didn't look away. I'm telling you someone set a trap. Cross stepped back toward them. If that's true, then we have a bigger problem. Andrea nodded. Yes, she said quietly. Then she looked again at the single dad standing beside the wheel. Which means we might also have the right person standing in the rain. Cross frowned. Dr. Lawson. Andrea gestured toward Marcus. He saw something my entire security team missed. Cross looked at the mechanic again. Mr. Webb, he said carefully. How exactly did you learn to spot something like this? Marcus hesitated. Let's just say I used to work around vehicles that people really wanted destroyed. Cross stared at him, the rain growing heavier. David Cross remained crouched beside the wheel long after Marcus finished speaking. He didn't like what he was seeing, and he liked even less that the man who'd spotted it first was standing there in worn boots with a socket wrench still lying beside him. Flashlight, Cross said. One of his men handed it over. The beam cut through the rain, illuminating the brake assembly. That's clean work, he muttered. Marcus nodded once. Too clean for highway debris. Cross straightened. Full inspection. Engine compartment, undercarriage, electronics, everything. Andrea watched the operation unfold with quiet intensity. Someone had sabotaged her vehicle. Someone had done it precisely enough that her own security detail missed it. And the only reason she knew now was because a single father with grease on his hands had decided to stop. Her gaze shifted to Marcus again. He wasn't watching her. He was watching the road. Marcus finally spoke. How long was the car parked before the tire blew? Andrea answered, without hesitation. 10 minutes. At the gas station. I stepped inside to take a call. Marcus nodded slowly. That's enough time. Cross crossed his arms. Enough time for what? For someone to weaken the tire and prep the brake line. One of the guards slid out from under the SUV. Cross, he said quietly. There's another issue. Cross turned. What kind? The guard held up a small piece of metal. A thin wedge of steel, sharpened on one side. Cross took it and examined it in the flashlight beam. His expression hardened. Spike insert. Andrea stepped closer. Meaning? Marcus answered before Cross could. It's designed to finish tearing the tire after the cut weakens it. Andrea's eyes narrowed. So, whoever did this expected the tire to fail at speed. Yeah. Cross looked between them. That's still only half the problem. Marcus nodded. The brake line. Another security driver approached Cross quickly. Sir, we may have something else. Cross turned sharply. What? The driver pointed toward the rear of the SUV. A faint oily sheen trailed from the back tire. Cross's jaw tightened. That's hydraulic fluid. Andrea went still. Marcus exhaled slowly. Brake pressure would have dropped fast once the line opened. Cross ran a hand through his rain-soaked hair. This wasn't random. No, Marcus said quietly. It was planned. Cross turned toward the dark highway stretching ahead. Planned for where? Marcus followed his gaze. Whoever did this expected you to drive away. And now we haven't, right? Cross frowned. So, what does that mean? Marcus glanced down the road again. Rain blurred the distant curve. It means the plan just changed. Cross felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Changed how? Marcus looked at the convoy, then at the dark road beyond it. If I were the one who set that trap, I wouldn't stop at one. Andrea's voice dropped. You think there's more? Marcus met her eyes. I think someone out there expected this convoy to crash tonight. The rain continued, and suddenly the quiet roadside repair felt less like a delay and more like the beginning of something far worse. Cross stood in the middle of it all, watching the quiet mechanic who had just overturned the entire security assessment of the evening. You're saying someone planned for the car to fail at that turn? Marcus nodded once. And you're saying that if we'd driven off 10 minutes ago, you'd probably be cleaning wreckage out of the guardrail right now, Marcus finished. Andrea wrapped her arms lightly around herself. David, assume the sabotage is real. Then assume whoever did it hasn't given up just because we stopped. Cross turned toward his team. Expand the perimeter. 200 yards both directions. Marcus watched them go. They're looking in the wrong place. Cross glanced at him. What do you mean? If someone wanted this to happen at speed, they didn't need to watch the crash. They just needed to make sure you left. Andrea stepped closer. So the person who did this could already be gone. Maybe. Cross frowned. Or maybe they're waiting to see if the trap worked. Marcus didn't disagree. Thunder rolled faintly across the distant hills. One of the guards hurried back. Sir, convoy vehicles 2 and 3 are clear. Cross nodded. Keep checking. Andrea studied the disabled SUV. How long would the brake line have held if we'd kept driving? Marcus crouched again beside the wheel. At highway speed, maybe a mile, maybe less. Cross followed the calculation in his head. That curve is half a mile away exactly. Andrea looked down the dark road again, meaning the failure would have happened right in the turn. Cross ran a hand down his jaw. Whoever did this knew they're out. Cross's phone buzzed in his pocket. He answered quickly. His expression changed. Say that again. Marcus watched carefully. Andrea waited. Cross listened for another few seconds before hanging up. The fuel crew at the last stop just reported a suspicious vehicle. Andrea's eyes sharpened. What kind? White cargo van. Parked across the lot for about 15 minutes. Marcus spoke quietly. Same window of time your car was unattended. Cross nodded slowly. Exactly. Andrea frowned. Did anyone get a plate number?
Cross shook his head.
No cameras facing that direction. Marcus exhaled. That's not sloppy. That's deliberate. Cross studied him. You're awfully confident about that. Marcus met his gaze calmly. People who plan something like this don't improvise. Andrea crossed her arms again. Then the question becomes obvious. Cross finished the thought. Who wants you dead? Andrea's expression hardened slightly. Quite a few people, actually. Marcus raised an eyebrow. That's comforting. Cross looked down the highway again. If that van followed the convoy, then the driver knows the plan failed. Marcus nodded grimly, which means they'll adjust. Another guard jogged toward them. Sir, remaining vehicles are clear. Cross exhaled with relief. At least the convoy itself is safe. Marcus glanced back at the disabled SUV. Except that one. Cross nodded. We'll tow it. Marcus shook his head. Cross frowned. What? If the brake line's cut the way I think it is, towing could trigger the failure, too. Cross stared at him. You're telling me the car is basically a rolling trap? Pretty much. Andrea sighed softly. Wonderful. Cross stepped closer to Marcus. All right. You've clearly seen things like this before. What's the safest way to move that vehicle? Marcus looked at the damaged wheel again, then down the highway, then back at Cross. You don't move it yet. Cross frowned. What do you mean? You stabilize the brake pressure first. Cross crossed his arms. And how do we do that? Marcus tilted his head slightly. With the right tools. Cross gestured toward the convoy. We have tools. Marcus shook his head. Not the kind this needs. Andrea's eyes narrowed. You're saying you know how to fix it? Marcus nodded. Cross looked skeptical. In the rain on the side of the highway? Marcus shrugged. I've worked in worse places. Cross studied him carefully. You really were around military vehicles, weren't you? Marcus didn't answer. Andrea looked between them. David. Cross hesitated. Then he nodded slowly. All right. Show us how it's done. Marcus knelt beside the wheel again, rainwater dripping from the edge of the SUV onto his jacket. The convoy's headlights cast long white beams across the pavement, turning the small patch of road into a makeshift work area. He opened the worn tool bag from his pickup parked a few yards behind them. Inside were ordinary tools, wrenches, clamps, a pressure gauge taped together with old electrical tape. Andrea stepped closer. What exactly are you doing? Marcus held up a small metal clamp. Temporary pressure lock. Cross frowned. You carry that around for flat tires? Marcus gave a faint shrug. Sometimes jobs turn into bigger problems. He slid partially under the SUV, reaching toward the damaged brake line. For several seconds, the only sound was the steady tapping of rain and the low hum of the convoy engines. Then Marcus spoke from under the vehicle. Whoever cut this line knew exactly where to do it. Cross crouched lower. You keep saying that. Marcus tightened something with a short metallic click. Brake pressure lines don't just fail cleanly unless someone preps the failure point. Andrea crossed her arms. You're certain this was intentional? Yes. Cross watched carefully as Marcus adjusted the clamp. You sound like you've investigated sabotage before. A quiet pause followed. Then Marcus slid out from beneath the SUV. His face was wet, streaked with rain and grease. Investigated it. Prevented it. Cleaned up after it.
Cross studied him again.
That doesn't sound like roadside mechanic work. It isn't. Andrea's curiosity deepened. Where did you learn it? Marcus leaned back on his heels, examining the brake line again. Convoys. Cross exchanged a quick glance with Andrea. Military convoys. Marcus didn't confirm it, but he didn't deny it either. He tightened the clamp another quarter turn. The metal line hissed softly as pressure equalized. Cross heard it immediately. You just sealed it. Temporarily, Marcus corrected. It'll hold long enough to move the car safely. Andrea exhaled slowly. You did that in under 2 minutes. Marcus wiped his hands again. Didn't have the luxury of taking longer where I learned it. Cross leaned closer to inspect the repair. Pressure looks stable, he admitted. Marcus nodded. But don't drive it far. Cross stood again, glancing toward the distant curve in the road. That turn would have killed her. Marcus didn't answer. He didn't need to. Andrea looked down at the damaged wheel. You saved my life tonight. Marcus shook his head slightly. Not yet. Cross frowned. What do you mean? Marcus gestured toward the convoy. Whoever set that trap didn't expect this delay. Cross followed his gaze. You think they're still nearby? I think someone planned this carefully. Andrea tilted her head. And careful people check their work. A guard jogged toward them from the roadside perimeter. Sir. Cross turned. What is it? The guard pointed down the highway. Vehicle approaching from the north. Cross narrowed his eyes. Headlights appeared in the distance. Andrea's voice dropped. That wasn't one of ours.
Cross shook his head. No.
The approaching lights moved slower than normal traffic. Marcus stood up fully, watching the road. That might be your van. Cross's hand drifted toward his sidearm. Everyone hold positions. Guards shifted into defensive positions around the convoy. Andrea remained beside Marcus. You think they came back to see if the job worked? Maybe. The headlights grew brighter as the vehicle approached.
Cross spoke into his radio.
Vehicle incoming. White cargo van, possibly suspect. The van slowed even further. For a moment, it looked like the driver might stop. Instead, the van accelerated suddenly, swerving violently and disappearing down a side access road before anyone could react. Cross lowered his weapon slowly. Damn it. Andrea looked toward the road where it vanished. They came back. Marcus nodded. And now they know the trap didn't work. Cross turned back toward him. How sure are you about that? Marcus gestured toward the disabled SUV. Because if the plan had worked, they'd be looking at a wreck right now. Andrea exhaled slowly. Instead, they saw us standing here. Cross nodded grimly. So now they'll adapt. Marcus looked down the highway again. The rain had almost stopped, but the air still felt heavy. They already did. Cross studied him. What makes you say that? Marcus pointed toward the road, where the van disappeared. Because whoever was driving that didn't panic. They were observing. Exactly. Andrea crossed her arms. They wanted confirmation. Marcus nodded. And now they have it. Cross rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. So the question becomes... Andrea finished the sentence. What do they try next? Here is the shortened version of that scene. Marcus looked at the highway. If someone planned that crash carefully, they planned a backup. Cross turned to his guards. Stay alert. Andrea glanced at Marcus. You're staying with us until the city. That wasn't the plan. Neither was saving my life tonight. Marcus thought about Caleb waiting at home. Then he looked at the convoy. You might need someone who knows these traps, Andrea said. Marcus sighed. She was right. Somewhere in the dark, the person who set the trap knew it had failed. Cross stared down the access road. They came to confirm the outcome, he said. Andrea nodded. And they confirmed it failed. Marcus tightened the last clamp. There, he said calmly. Cross looked at the repair. That's it. It'll hold long enough to move slowly. Andrea studied him. You did that in the rain with basic tools. Marcus wiped his hands. Tools matter less than knowing where the problem is. Cross looked down the road. So, whoever set this knows we're still alive. Yeah. And they saw you fix it. That's fine. Cross frowned. You're not worried? Marcus shook his head. People like this don't care who fixes the first problem. Andrea finished the thought. Because they already planned the second one. Cross exhaled. That's what I didn't want to hear. He walked to his team. Radios crackled with new orders. Andrea stayed beside Marcus. You're very calm for someone who just discovered a murder attempt. Calm helps you see what everyone else misses. That sounds like training. It is. Cross returned. We're changing the route. South instead of the interstate. Andrea crossed her arms. That still leaves who planned this and why tonight. Cross looked at her. The board meeting tomorrow. Andrea didn't respond, but Marcus saw the tension. That meeting important, he asked. Very. Cross looked at the repaired SUV. If someone wanted to stop that meeting, they'd start by removing the person running it. Andrea exhaled. That narrows the suspects. Cross nodded. Corporate rivals. political enemies, anyone affected by tomorrow's vote. Cross turned to a driver. Bring the flatbed truck. Marcus raised a hand.
Wait.
Flatbed might trigger the pressure shift too. Cross frowned. You said it would hold for slow driving. Andrea glanced between them. So, we drive it. Marcus nodded. Carefully. Cross rubbed his temples. That's $1 million vehicle. Then treat it gently. Andrea almost laughed. Cross looked at Marcus. You're coming with us. I figured. Cross pointed to the passenger seat. You ride there. You trust me that much already?
Cross shook his head.
I trust you more than a mechanical failure. Andrea smiled. That's practically a compliment. Marcus looked at his pickup. 2 missed calls from home sat on his phone. Cross followed his gaze. You got somewhere to be? My son. How old? 9. Cross glanced at the convoy. This won't take long. Marcus wasn't convinced. But someone had just tried to kill this woman, and whoever did it was still out there. He couldn't pretend he hadn't seen it. He grabbed his tool bag and tossed it into the back seat. Cross started the engine. The repaired brake line held. Slowly, the convoy pulled back onto the wet highway. None of them knew the person who set the trap was already planning the next one. The SUV rolled forward. Cross kept both hands on the wheel. The brake pressure held steady. Marcus watched the road. Not the convoy. The road. Andrea leaned forward.
Speed.
35. Slow is safe. Marcus nodded. For the next few miles. The rain softened to mist. The convoy spread out in a tight formation. Cross spoke into the radio. Convoy maintaining low speed. Route change confirmed. Southbound. A voice crackled back. Andrea rested her hand on the front seat. How far to the alternate road? About 8 miles. Marcus leaned toward the windshield. That's where you'll want to slow again. Cross frowned. You memorizing the road? Habit. Andrea studied him. You really did spend a long time doing this. Road conditions tell you a lot if you pay attention. Cross drove in silence. You still think there's a backup? I know they did. You're very certain. Because they came back, Andrea said. Marcus watched the dark road. That wasn't panic. That was someone checking the result. Cross nodded. Which means they were close. Exactly. Andrea broke the silence. How does a mechanic spot sabotage faster than a trained security team? Cross smirked. I was wondering the same thing. Marcus exhaled. You ever watch something break apart in slow motion? Convoys hit by mechanical traps. Vehicles designed to fail when attackers need them to. Andrea's eyes narrowed. That's military sabotage. Cross laughed under his breath. You weren't just around convoys. You were the guy who figured out why they failed. Marcus looked back at the road. Andrea leaned back. That's quite a career change. Yeah. Cross glanced at him. What made you walk away? Marcus hesitated. Then he answered simply, my son. Andrea watched him carefully. That's it. That's enough. Here is the shortened version of that scene. The SUV crossed a small bridge. Water rushed below, dark and swollen. Cross checked the speed. 32. Keep it there, Marcus said. The radio crackled. Lead vehicle to command. Road ahead clear. Copy. Cross answered. Andrea glanced out the window. Do you think the person who set this trap is still nearby? Hard to say, but possible, Marcus replied. The road curved left. Cross slowed. Pressure still holding. Marcus watched the brake gauge. Then his expression changed. Cross noticed. What? Slow down. We're already slow. Slower. Cross eased off the accelerator. Marcus pointed through the windshield. A faint shimmer stretched across the road, almost invisible, like oil on water. Cross's stomach dropped. Is that? Yeah, Marcus said quietly. Another trap. Cross braked hard, the SUV nearly crawling now. The convoy slowed behind them. Andrea stared ahead. Oil. Maybe, Marcus said. But no accident leaves a spread that even. Someone laid it there, right where we'd slow for the curve. Cross looked toward the tree line. Damn it. Marcus scanned the dark woods. Don't stop here. If someone set this trap, they're watching to see if it works. Andrea understood. So if we stop, they'll know we spotted it. Cross exhaled. You're saying we keep moving? Marcus nodded. Carefully. Cross stared at the slick road. Oil, rain, a curve. Every instinct screamed danger. But the calm man beside him had solved this puzzle before. All right, Cross said quietly. You guide me. Marcus nodded once, and the convoy crept forward into the dark.